Beneath the enigmatic, soundless expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, where solar rays fail to reach, an intrepid crew of underwater explorers undertakes a perilous descent. Their objective involves investigating a neglected remnant of warfare, a vessel shrouded in enigma and abandoned by time itself. Yet when they breach the frigid, deteriorated framework, their findings exceed every anticipation. Secrets buried for decades emerge from the depths, confronting established narratives and posing inquiries nobody previously dared contemplate. What remains concealed within this submerged sepulchre, and why has its chronicle been obliterated? Brace yourself for an expedition into uncharted territory where every revelation unveils deeper mysteries. Before continuing, we respectfully request your engagement through likes and subscriptions to support our platform. Your backing proves invaluable to our mission. Picture an underwater instrument of destruction, engineered to instill fear beneath ocean surfaces. This was U-869, among the extended-range deep-water combat vessels belonging to Nazi Germany's fleet. We're discussing a nearly 76-meter mechanical marvel equipped with half a dozen torpedo launchers and commanded by a captain possessing steel resolve. This formidable war machine was constructed for infiltrating hostile territories and creating devastation while maintaining concealment. So where did this engineering masterpiece of Nazi innovation disappear to? Prepare for profound revelations, because what those explorers ultimately discovered within the vessel's interior fundamentally altered historical understanding, quite different from conventional academic teachings. Military documentation indicates U-869 received orders to monitor Gibraltar's strait waters, a confined and treacherous passage frequently traversed by Allied vessels. Their assignment involved intercepting communications, disrupting operations, and vanishing without detection. However, events didn't unfold according to plan. During February 1945, American Coast Guard personnel reported destroying a German submarine near Gibraltar. Allied forces immediately claimed responsibility, congratulating themselves for eliminating another Nazi underwater craft. They presumed it was U-869, filed the documentation, and considered the matter resolved. Nevertheless, it wasn't U-869, and for decades, nobody questioned this account. Neither the American Navy, historians, nor relatives of the 56 German sailors supposedly perished with the submarine doubted the official version. It became merely another forgotten tragedy within World War II's pages, one additional entry among the casualty lists. No confirmed sonar readings, wreckage photographs, or additional proof existed. Only military paperwork remained available. Anyone familiar with wartime military reporting understands accuracy wasn't their specialty, particularly when the Atlantic functioned as an active battleground where personnel estimated positions while evading torpedoes. Officials declared U-869's case concluded, but the actual submarine had been redirected and never received updated instructions. The reality proves startling. U-869's final mission involved confusion and miscommunication. Originally on December 29, 1944, Submarine Command ordered U-869 to patrol waters near New Jersey's coastline. However, due to fuel limitation concerns, this directive was subsequently canceled, and U-869 received instructions to relocate its patrol area west of Gibraltar, excluding the strait proper. Despite repeated attempts, U-869 failed acknowledging these revised orders. The submarine's last communication occurred January 10, 1945, when it reported fuel reserves without disclosing position or confirming the modified patrol zone. Consequently, German commanders assumed U-869 operated near Gibraltar and, following its disappearance, believed it was lost there. For the subsequent 40 years, U-869 remained nothing more than a phantom vessel mentioned in aging documents. The deceased crew's families had no graves or debris to mourn, only memorial names and countless unanswered questions. Even military historians couldn't reach consensus. Some maintained the Gibraltar narrative, while others investigated further. Their discoveries decades later off New Jersey's coast revolutionized everything. How did one of Hitler's most lethal machines vanish without trace, only to be located exactly where nobody searched? Let's journey back to summer 1991. Classic rock-filled radio waves, and somewhere beyond Point Pleasant, New Jersey, a group of adventure seekers was about to stumble upon something that would overturn decades of military history. This team comprised enthusiastic wreck divers, shipwreck investigators, and deep-sea exploration enthusiasts who approached underwater archaeology like others approach fantasy sports. Among them were John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, two of the East Coast's most respected yet admittedly reckless dive explorers. These weren't ordinary beach enthusiasts. They were technical divers, essentially volunteers who descended into pitch-black, freezing death traps hundreds of feet below ocean surfaces purely for excitement. That summer, their goal involved exploring unmapped shipwrecks scattered across the seafloor, armed only with sonar equipment, determination, and questionable life insurance policies. You must understand that Jersey Shore waters resemble an underwater scrapyard, containing shipwrecks from various wars and maritime disasters distributed throughout the ocean floor like forgotten metallic specters. When their sonar detected an elongated, streamlined object approximately 60 miles offshore at 230 feet depth, it wasn't shocking. However, it was unusual. The image appeared suspiciously submarine-like rather than resembling a fishing vessel. Their initial dive to the wreckage failed. Currents proved too powerful, visibility remained poor, and everything felt wrong. The environment was cold, completely dark, and twisted, covered with fishing nets. Imagine crawling through an abandoned metal cavern where visibility extends only 3 feet ahead, and every forward movement could spell disaster. But they immediately recognized this wasn't mere debris. It was something substantial. That's where things became fascinating. When John Chatterton and Richie Kohler surfaced and began researching, all historical records conveyed identical information. No German submarines had been lost in that vicinity. According to Allied documentation, the last known submarine activity in that area occurred on the Atlantic's opposite side near Gibraltar Strait, thousands of miles from Jersey's coast. So what were they actually examining? To compound the mystery, the wreckage bore no markings, no hull numbers, nameplates, or identifying features indicating it was a German submarine present since 1945. Only twisted steel, sealed hatches, and echoes of something long forgotten remained. Chatterton and Kohler were deeply invested, literally and figuratively, having discovered a phantom submarine that officially didn't exist. They nicknamed it U-Who, and it became their obsession. For years, they returned to this location, diving repeatedly under hazardous conditions. These weren't ordinary diving situations. They required mixed gas usage, careful decompression schedules, and constant danger from the nitrogen narcosis, equipment failure, or entanglement in twisted, corroded steel. Every dive represented calculated risks. Gradually, the wreckage revealed its secrets, beginning with pressure gauges featuring German text, then metric system dials, eerily preserved compartments, and finally the breakthrough, a simple tarnished table knife engraved with Horenberg. That's when investigation intensified significantly. With naval archives and historians' assistance, they traced the name to Georg Horenberg, an actual U-869 crew member. This discovery proved the submarine was indeed U-869, but that revelation only generated more chilling questions. Why was it located here? What caused its destruction? And why had nobody searched in the correct location? For years, Richie Kohler and John Chatterton obsessed over identifying the wreckage discovered off New Jersey's coast. Although they suspected it was a German submarine, no official records confirmed a submarine wreck in that area. That changed when they uncovered a table knife bearing an engraved name. With that single utensil, they possessed their first concrete evidence, linking this phantom submarine to a real identity. This led them to cross-reference additional data. They examined records from the Deschimag shipyard in Germany, the company that constructed U-869, and began matching serial numbers until they found engine components with corresponding manufacturer documentation. The details confirmed their suspicions. This wreckage, unidentified for years, was undoubtedly the missing U-869, lost in action along with 56 crew members. As divers assembled the final puzzle pieces, attempting to reconstruct what happened to the submarine and its crew, they encountered something even more shocking. One crew member should have been aboard but wasn't present. His name was Herbert Guszewski. Guszewski had been assigned to U-869 during the final weeks before departure. He'd trained with the crew, shared quarters, and memorized identical emergency procedures. But shortly before the submarine's scheduled departure, Herbert became gravely ill. This fortunate twist of fate preserved his life. Now, decades later, living quietly in Germany, Herbert had no reason to believe his former submarine had ended up anywhere except the Mediterranean. Like everyone else, he accepted the official narrative. Then Kohler and Chatterton approached him as part of their investigation, though they weren't certain he remained alive. When they located him, Herbert was bewildered. Everything he'd been told for over 50 years contradicted this new information. But they showed him photographs of wreckage items, engine parts, and most importantly, the table knife engraved with Horenberg's name. Someone he'd trained with, and assumed, had perished somewhere far away in southern Europe. Herbert then confirmed it was indeed Horenberg with whom he'd served, remembering him distinctly. That small knife, forgotten in the wreckage for half a century, contained more proof than any document. Herbert, now elderly, realized he'd miraculously escaped a watery grave while his friends died where nobody had thought to look. He didn't seek interviews or pursue headlines. However, he maintained contact with the divers quietly, working behind the scenes to help identify other crew members and verify the submarine's origins from the German perspective. His memory and insights provided something no database could offer. Herbert passed away in 2005 without ever seeing the sealed compartments later discovered in the submarine, or perhaps he knew about them all along and simply never spoke about it. That's something we'll never know for certain. Still, we know that a single table knife solved one of the 20th century's most incredible underwater mysteries. A simple artifact became the key that unlocked decades of hidden history, retrieved from the depths by two divers who refused to surrender. Yes, a table knife revealed the truth, but what had been sealed behind the submarine's corroded doors would expose much more. When John Chatterton, Richie Kohler, and their team finally began penetrating deeper into U-869's wreckage, they weren't just descending into metal, they were immersing themselves in memories. The submarine's interior resembled walking through a cramped, corroded mausoleum. Metal walls that once resonated with laughter, arguments, and the clatter of boots on gratings were now motionless, silent, and cold, yet remarkably well preserved. Let's begin with the crew quarters. The divers found bunks stacked like sardines, barely large enough for a grown man to crawl into. Some still contained rotting mattresses and scattered books, their pages warped from decades underwater, but still legible enough to read. Then came the galley, or what remained of it. Plates remained on tables, scattered utensils, and one eerily well-preserved ration skin that appeared as if someone had just stepped out momentarily. Only no one ever returned. The atmosphere inside seemed thick with something unspoken, some kind of emotional residue. These were no longer Nazi officers from history textbooks. These were people, some 19 years old, others 22. They were young men trying to pass time between patrols, probably arguing over food or joking about their superiors. Allegedly, in one corner of the wreck, divers found a locker that opened, its contents still floating inside. There were leather gloves, a rusty harmonica, and playing cards sealed in plastic. In the midst of war, under crushing pressure, surrounded by torpedoes and death, someone took time to bring music. It was gut-wrenching proof that life aboard U-869 wasn't just mechanical but human. The control station was a twisted steel cage of levers, buttons, and shattered glass. Most pressure gauges had burst under pressure, but some stubbornly clung to walls. German inscriptions and metric numbers were everywhere. It was like being inside a control panel designed for military operations. You could almost imagine the crew standing there, fingers sliding across switches as orders were issued. Through narrow corridors, one of the most disturbing areas was the torpedo room. The divers discovered several torpedo tubes remained sealed, raising additional questions. If they were under attack, why didn't they fire? If it was an accident gone wrong, the torpedoes themselves were long gone and some were inaccessible. But around the submarine were these haunting signs of everyday life that history books don't mention. Boots still standing against walls, a shaving kit, a rusty toothbrush, and a cracked mirror that still caught the beam of divers' flashlights. A man probably looked at himself in that mirror the morning the submarine sank, probably adjusted his collar, smoothed his hair, and thought of home. The part that haunted the divers most was the intimacy of it all. Everyone was amazed at how much had been preserved. The Atlantic Ocean, however violent, had kept the wreck sealed like a time capsule. Low oxygen levels, cold water, and no light created the perfect environment for preserving what should have decayed decades ago. Rubber seals still clung to locker doors. Paper documents, though fragile, were still there. Even some clothing, like uniforms with Nazi insignia and name patches, remained intact. It's difficult to reconcile these symbols with the personal belongings nearby. It made everything real, not in a political sense, but in a painfully human sense. These weren't textbook characters, they were frightened young men trapped in a steel tube, ordered to fight for a crumbling empire. Some probably believed in the cause, others didn't, but ultimately it didn't matter. The ocean didn't care which side you were on. It claimed them all. U-869 was no longer just a submarine. It had become a memorial that waited buried beneath waves for someone to come searching. Thanks to these divers, the voices inside were finally heard. Personal effects, sealed torpedo tubes, and a mirror that may have reflected someone's last glimpse. Something went terribly wrong aboard U-869. But what if the real threat came from within? Let's start with this chilling theory. U-869 sank itself, not due to sabotage or desertion. We're discussing one of the worst nightmares a submarine crew can imagine: a circular run. If you're unfamiliar with this term, it essentially refers to a malfunctioning torpedo that, instead of traveling straight toward its target, veers off in a circular trajectory, potentially threatening the vessel that fired it. You launch the torpedo, it makes a wild turn, and within seconds, it becomes your own coffin. This phenomenon was a known problem during World War II, affecting torpedoes from various navies, including German and American forces. Several submarines were lost due to their own weapons, the clearest example of friendly fire gone wrong. Supporters of this theory believe U-869 fired a test torpedo or perhaps launched an attack. However, the torpedo's guidance system malfunctioned, causing it to complete a wide circle and strike the submarine before anyone could react. The damage observed on U-869's hull supports this theory. The explosion caused internal rather than external destruction, originating from inside and crushing compartments like a soda can stepped on by a giant. However, while this theory is terrifying and plausible, it's not the only explanation circulating in submarine communities. Another theory, supported by U.S. Navy records, suggests U-869 was destroyed in combat by American destroyers. According to this version, two American vessels, the USS Howard D. Crowe and the USS Coiner, made contact with the submarine on February 11, 1945, somewhere off the eastern coastline. They allegedly detected acoustic signals, identified them as submarine-related, and subsequently launched a coordinated depth charge attack. After the war, when records were organized and filed like tax receipts, this submarine destruction was officially attributed to U-869's sinking. Naturally, that should have concluded the story, except the wreckage didn't align with exact coordinates provided in those Navy logs. It was close, but not precisely accurate. The more diverse examined the wreckage, the stranger it became. If U-869 was sunk by depth charges, why were several torpedo tubes still sealed? Shouldn't a submarine in active combat have fired at least one weapon? And if caught by surprise, wouldn't there be more damage evidence on top rather than inside? That's where murky waters enter. The pun is entirely appropriate. Yes, some portions of the submarine's outer hull had deformations that could have been consistent with nearby depth charge shockwaves. However, the damage extent wasn't exactly consistent with expectations from a direct hit. Internally, the most significant damage appeared in the forward compartment, exactly where a wayward torpedo would have struck if it had returned toward its sender. So now we have a tug-of-war between the self-destruction theory and the U.S. Navy's official version of events. Frankly, both sides have evidence, but let's say these documents are stained, half-faded, and missing several signatures. What's really fueling speculation is the possibility that U-869 was operating under secret orders, diverted during the war's chaotic final months. By 1945, German high command was in complete disarray. Communications were sloppy, and orders constantly changed. Many logs were either lost, destroyed, or never properly recorded. So it's quite possible U-869 was sent elsewhere, maybe even toward the United States, something never officially recorded. That theory would explain its strange location, lack of defensive action, and even confusion about who sank it. Perhaps the Navy really did sink a submarine on February 11th, but not this one. Then there's a darker theory, with less documentation and more speculation, suggesting U-869 may have been on a secret mission, perhaps transporting supplies or deploying agents. Nobody knows for certain. However, the secrecy surrounding its discovery, the wreckage's condition, and classified silence after artifact recovery have raised many eyebrows. As for consensus, that depends on who you ask. The U.S. Navy still subscribes to the destroyer theory. They've maintained it in records for decades and haven't budged. However, diverse shipwreck historians and many independent experts lean toward the circular run explanation. Internal damage, sealed torpedo tubes, no evidence of battlefield engagement. It doesn't add up perfectly, but it's close enough to seem correct. So who really sank U-869? Was it a fatal mistake from within or a stealth assassination from above? The truth may still lie there, rusting in silence. But one thing's certain, this isn't just a submarine story. It's about uncertainty, about how even the coldest cases can still burn with questions, and how sometimes even the ocean can't bury truth forever. Two theories, missing records, and remnants of a secret mission, but no clear answer. What if the wreckage itself wasn't just evidence but a message we were never meant to discover? It's easy to think of World War II as something confined to textbooks, documentaries, or old black and white newsreels. Nearly a century has passed, and with such distance between then and now, it's tempting to believe all major stories have been told, every mystery solved, every hero named, every battle documented down to the last bullet. But then U-869's discovery didn't just rewrite a line in some dusty naval war report. It challenged the notion that history is ever truly complete. Here was this massive piece of military hardware lost in time, sitting just hours off the Jersey shore, and nobody, not the U.S., Navy, not German historians, not the crew's families, knew of its existence. When finally found, it wasn't thanks to some government-sponsored expedition with research grants and battleships. It was two individuals with a boat and a dangerous obsession with truth. That's what makes this story remarkable. It wasn't about military might or historical prestige. It was about curiosity. Technology certainly helped. Side-scan sonar, mixed gas diving, and high-tech mapping software played crucial roles in locating and exploring the wreck. But technology is merely a tool. Human determination made the discovery possible. Men like John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, who spent hundreds of hours risking their lives just to answer questions about what the submarine was and why it was there. When they finally determined it was U-869, history took on a new dimension because it wasn't just about the war anymore. It was about 56 young men barely out of childhood, sealed in a steel tomb beneath the Atlantic for 5 decades. They had families, names, lives that didn't make it into history books. The divers found not just a submarine, but humanity inside the wreckage. Everything remained in place. Personal uniforms, photographs, a rusty harmonica. You could see moments of their lives frozen in time. It was no longer about Nazi insignia or military strategies. It was about what it meant to be human amid something as vast and inexorable as World War II. These were individuals who probably wanted to return home as much as anyone on the war's other side. The ocean was holding their story, just waiting for someone to finally listen. That's what this reminds us. War is massively chaotic and far more personal than we ever want to acknowledge. It's not just tanks, maps, and generals, it's fear, boredom, laughter, and grief all happening simultaneously. Every shipwreck at the ocean's bottom isn't just a piece of history. It's a message in a bottle from someone who never got to finish their story. Modern technology is allowing us to uncover more of these forgotten voices than ever before. With sonar capable of mapping ocean floors like Google Earth, with diving equipment enabling people to safely explore depths that used to be suicide zones, we now have power to revisit the darkest corners of our past and bring truth to light. But with that power comes responsibility to tell these stories correctly, because frankly, U-869 could easily have been lost forever. It's terrifying to think how many other submarines, ships, or entire units from that war and others are still out there somewhere, unknown, their stories buried under layers of silt and secrecy. With each discovery, we're not just adding something to history books, we're making history more real, more human. That's why this story matters. Not because it's dramatic or surprising, which it is, but because it's a wake-up call reminding us there are always new layers to the past, always people whose stories haven't been told. U-869's discovery didn't end with submarine identification. It started a new chapter in how we think about World War II, naval warfare, and lives caught between. So when you hear about divers finding old wrecks, remember, this wreck may be someone's resting place, someone who never made it home, never left their name in the world they left behind. Thanks to people like Chatterton and Kohler and the technology that helped them, we have opportunities to give these stories second lives. We get chances to remember people who weren't generals, leaders, or celebrities, just kids in uniform who followed orders and disappeared into the sea. The truth is, the ocean doesn't forget anything. It keeps every secret, every mistake, every sorrow. But now, at last, we have tools and will to ask for answers. And sometimes it responds. What do you think really happened to U-869? Was it destroyed by its own weapon in a tragic twist of fate? Or did Allied forces strike a blow that history simply lost? Thank you for staying with us throughout this video. If you think our work is important, please show support by liking and subscribing. To stay updated on future broadcasts and remain at the center of events, you can click the bell for notifications.